What's going on, everybody? I hope you guys are having a good day. I'm gonna let you guys come into the chat. I am Dr. Boyce Watkins from Your Black World and the Black Business School, and I want to welcome everybody to drboycetv.com. This is the home for intelligent Black people. So if you are not Black and intelligent, then you may want to leave, because these conversations will be above your pay grade, and it's probably gonna hurt your feelings, because we tell the truth up in here. Media does not tell the truth, and that is what we do. So we have one job, and that is to give you what you need to be empowered and Black and to win the battle. Today, I have the honor of bringing in a very special guest, an individual for whom I have tremendous respect. He is an individual who has paid his dues over almost half a century, I believe, in fighting for Black people. You should know about him. You probably already do. If you don't, you should know, go do your research on him. His name is Dr. Ron Daniels. Dr. Daniels is the founder and president of the Institute for the Black World 21st Century. And so without further ado, I'd like to welcome my brother, Dr. Daniels. How are you doing today, sir?
Hey, it's wonderful, man. I'm ready to get on this Black conversation, man. I'm down with that, man. I know this is not going to be below our pay grade.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah, this is fun. You know, it's a lot of fun to live in a world where Black folks can get together and have good conversations, and we don't have to go through gatekeepers and try to get on TV or radio. The internet is the new television for Black people. Like, that's the new radio, the new everything. And I love it so much. I mean, I'm in here all the time, every day, because it's a dream to be able to talk to my people every day, man. I just love it.
Well, you know, and you've done a remarkable job, and I have great respect for you, because, you know, you get caught up in academia, and in those spaces that we fought for and created, frankly, from the Black liberation movement, we positioned people to be there so they could, in fact, do what you were doing and have been doing. And that is to have a liberating message, even around your craft. In other words, it's not just about business. It's how do you use business in a liberating way in Black communities across this country. Well, you know, as things went on from decade to decade, those who never wanted to deal with Black studies in the first place counterattacked. And when they counterattacked, they wanted to remove people like you, because, you know, they wanted to have something that was much more technical and much more orthodox in terms of what the discipline is about. But we were not fighting for that. In fact, the brothers and sisters who came out of the streets were, in fact, very dissatisfied with a curriculum and institutions that were not serving the interests of Black people. So you were there fighting for us, getting the information out. You came under siege, but you made us move that I'm sure they're envious of, but they can't stop it. You know,
they can't stop it.
They can't stop. As MC Hammer said, can't touch this.
do. Well, you know what? I tell you, you know, and I believe that that's the way things work. You know, the best thing I figured out as a Black man is that I you know, we should not expect anybody to make our liberation an easy process. You know, ain't nobody gonna clap for you when you go win the championship trophy. When when you're trying to fight for a big piece of chicken or for scarce resources, at least in America, nobody will applaud for the truly empowered Black man, the truly empowered Black woman. Very few people will. You know, other Black people might applaud for you if you're lucky. But, you know, when I learned to stop sort of waiting for my oppressor to give me permission to be free, that's when I said, okay, I think I figured out the keys to freedom. The key is that you're going to have to fight. You're going to have some discomfort. Maybe you'll be marginalized, attacked, disrespected, or whatever, spit on a little bit. But you know, when they spit on me, I spit back, or I fight back, or whatever. You know, like you're not gonna pump me out.
You know, but Frederick Douglass, you know, you were at Syracuse, right down the road a piece, but Frederick Douglass was everywhere. But he was such an eloquent and insightful leader, because he said, power concedes nothing without a struggle. It never has and it never will. You know, and he said, this is what it's going to be like. You know, and if you don't want the crops, then don't mess around and bust up the soil. If you don't want you know, the lightning, you know, the rain, then you got to deal with the thunder and the lightning. So, and that's what, and we have to understand that as Black people. You know what I mean? It is a protracted struggle, and it is a struggle, however, that holds victory at the end. But that victory may not be in my lifetime. I mean, you know, Harriet Tubman, as she said before, I could have freed a whole lot more if they had just known they were slaves. I mean, Harriet Tubman was not only, she was liberating Black people for that moment, but she also knew she was setting up and tracing a trail for the future. And frankly, that's what inspires me and keeps me moving, is that, and then Martin Luther King, you know, that's the speech the night before he died. You know, he looked at the mountaintop, he said, hey, I've seen the promised land. He said, I may not get there with you, but my people will get there. And that's what it seems to me is our obligation as, you know, as scholars and activists. And that's what makes us scholar activists, by the way. It's the action-oriented intellectual that understands and sees what's going on, but then interprets and takes what we know, that knowledge, and takes it back to the masses of our people for feedback and then for implementation. But also to understand that given our experience as Black people in this country, Africans in this country, it will be difficult. And not only will the master be difficult for us sometimes because of internalized oppression, because we have been taught to, systematically through a process I call cultural aggression, which is unlike any other African people, frankly, that were enslaved. That doesn't mean that slavery in the Caribbean wasn't brutal, wasn't difficult, so forth and so on. But in this country, when Malcolm said, we didn't land on Plymouth Rock landed on us, you know, that was very profound. He also said, and this is the key one, he said of all of the crimes committed by Europeans against Africans, he said the greatest crime is to take our names. And name is about culture. And so there's a systematic process that took place in terms of trying to get Black people to de-Africanize the African, to reduce us to property, and to make us hate ourselves, and to make us love white people, frankly. And so we have been on a struggle from the very beginning, and it's been a protracted struggle, you know, to try to out of this diverse group of African people, create a new African community. And it's been twists and turns and so forth. But we always have to remind ourselves of that. So when we bump up against difficulties in our community, we bump up against Black folks who don't understand what's happening. And we could easily say, oh, they ain't ready. But no. We have to understand what we've been through, the trials, the tribulations, the trauma that we've been involved in. And so my responsibility is to understand that, be patient, keep working, understanding that, it may not be in my lifetime, but we are going to get to the promised land. And that promised land is really, the redemption of Black people, both in terms of what here, but then from a Pan-Africanist perspective, it is also the global redemption of African people. And in so doing, positioning us really to be a powerful force in the entire world.
Well, you know what, I think that's an excellent point you just made. And everybody who just came in, I want you all to know I'm speaking with Dr. Ron Daniels. He's the president and founder of the Institute for the Black World 21st Century. I mentioned to you guys the importance of us supporting our think tanks, supporting our institutions. That's what everyone else does. Every other community that wants to get ahead, they support their own. So I hope that you guys will go to the website. The website is ibw21.org. That's ibw, the number 21.org. And I hope that you'll consider adding the Institute for the Black World 21st Century in your budget for support. We have to support our own institutions and build our own universities, all that. We need our own infrastructure. It's really important for the vision for the future. Also, just to remind everybody, if you have an interest in real estate or if you'd like to know about investing, I'll be in Chicago on Sunday doing an investment seminar. You can go to drboycechicago.com or you can also join us next weekend where we're going to do a 2-day event on how to buy rental property. Julian Gordon from Stanford University graduate is going to teach that. You can go to theemancipationequation.com, THE, that's theemancipationequation.com. So Dr. Daniels, I want to ask you a question about something. There was a report that I just read about Bernie Sanders going to speak at the NAACP convention, which makes him better than people, like say the Trumps and others who don't even want to talk to Black folks at all. But Sanders went, and one of the things that stood out to me about Sanders is that Sanders has made it clear that he's against reparations, and I found that really interesting. I have an issue with that, and I'm going to ask your take on that in a second for sure. To be more specific, I'm going to read some of this to you in terms of what Sanders said, and also what led to the applause. Apparently, people applauded, when he said he was against reparations and explained why. And I'm just going to read this to you. So this is in the Washington Examiner. It says, here's his quote. It says, "Here's my fear about reparations, and I understand the issue, and I'm on board with the legislation that will study the issue. Here's my fear. He says, my fear is that Congress gives the African-American community a $20,000 check and says, thank you, that took care of slavery. We don't have to worry about anything anymore. I think that's wrong. I want to rebuild the distressed communities in America. And then he also said, he says, I think that right now our job is to address the crises facing the American people in our communities. And I think there are better ways to do that than just writing out a check. What are your thoughts as you hear this, Dr. Daniels?
Well, unfortunately, I know there are people who've tried to educate Bernie Sanders on this issue. And one of the reasons that we've asked presidential candidates not to get into the details of reparations and what form it would take and so forth and so on. And let me do this. When I say we, it is from the perspective of the National African American Reparations Commission that we've established. And we have a 10-point program that talks about, reparations and so forth. We are supporting and are vigorously engaged in helping to deal with HR 40 and so forth. But you see, what Bernie doesn't understand is, first of all, it's not all about a check. So we're talking about the collective repair of the Black community, right? But even if it was a check, that's fine. The Japanese got a check, in terms of what happened to them, those who were interned and turned into concentration camps in World War II. So that's I don't have an objection to that necessarily. But for him to try to make it either or is problematic and really shows his ignorance, frankly, on the issue. Because most people who are working on this issue are saying, and I think that's why people got the applause, because I think most African Americans are not necessarily interested in just the check. We're interested in how do we repair, heal, let me put that word heal in there, and repair our communities. So when we look at the 10-point program, for example, that we're dealing with in terms of the National African American Reparations Commission, we go through a series of different points there. One is the apology that's needed and forthcoming and so forth. But beyond that, we talk about the whole question of a knowledge program being established. Beyond that, we talk about the right to social and economic development. And in that, we talk about substantial tracts of government land to build things for Black people. The kind of economic work that you're doing that is so urgently and desperately needed in terms of the wealth gap in Black America. Funds for cooperative enterprises and socially entrepreneurial development, resources for health and wellness for Black families. We talk about education for community and economic development and empowerment, helping our HBCUs and others to get up on their feet. So this notion that the only thing that Black people are talking about to reduce it to a check is really disingenuous. And frankly, Bernie needs to stop that. And the advisors around him need to stop that. We appreciate the fact that he has signed off on HR 40. And by the way, what is HR 40? The new HR 40, or the HR 40, which was first introduced by our dear beloved friend, Congressman John Conyers, one of the most progressive members of Congress in the last half century, was to study, the initial version, 1989, was to study whether or not slavery warranted the granting of reparations. It was to study that issue. And then if so, to talk about what the consequences, what the remedies would be. Mm-hmm. Working with the National African American Reparations Commission, particularly within COBRA, the national organization, the National Coalition for Blacks, Reparations for Blacks in America, we helped to rewrite that bill so that it's no longer studying, because we have done enough studies. We study after study after study have shown the wealth gap, the inequality, all those things that, quite frankly, not only damaged Black people and held us back during the course of enslavement itself, but all of those things that have subsequently, through racially exclusionary policies, have done so. So this bill is the language is to study a commission to study reparations proposals for African Americans. And so now this commission, when set up, which now has more sponsors than ever before, the last count over 170 people, 107 Democratic co-sponsors of this bill. Now it's about 9 or 10 in the Senate with the version introduced by Cory Booker. That bill is no longer about studying whether we should get reparations. So rather than Bernie talking about that, one of the things that would be looked at with this commission is what form should reparations take? And that commission might say, well, maybe it's a check, maybe not a check. But my sense is, by and large, because we're going to be a part of the commission. I mean, there are going to be people, scholars and activists and people who worked on this who will be blending in with others. My sense is that people will be for the whole notion of how do we do collective repair? How do we help build the entirety of the Black community? And that's the thrust of what we're doing with the National African American Reparations Commission. We talk about creating a reparations trust fund. And so that various things could be deposited in that trust fund. The establishment of a commission, of a board of directors with people who are from across the board in the Black community, who have impeccable reputations and skill and talent, who would make decisions about, do we build a college or university? Do we build an independent school? Do we build a hospital or rebuild some of those hospitals and public and health centers that were in Black communities that got destroyed? You see what I'm saying? We're talking about that kind of repair, not necessarily whether or not every individual is going to get a check.
All right. Well, everybody who I see some of you are still coming in. I'm speaking with Dr. Ron Daniels. He is the founder and president of the Institute for the Black World 21st Century. His website is ibw21.org, ibw, the number 21.org. We're talking about reparations and also the fact that the NAACP convention, Bernie Sanders gave a speech, and he basically said that he's against reparations because cutting a check won't be enough. Basically, he says that we need to rebuild distressed communities, things like that, that I think most of us agree with. Let you guys say something in the chat. Let us know what your thoughts are about Sanders and about what he said. And also, please hit the thumbs up button. If you haven't hit the thumbs up button, please do that. So Dr. Daniels, you know, I'm gonna tell you, when I heard what Sanders said, every time Sanders talks about a race issue, I start to get real. I start getting triggered. I start breaking out in hives, and just kind of, because I listen to him talk, and what he really unfortunately does not, I think, realize that he sounds like, at least to an intelligent Black person, is he sounds like one of those paternalistic liberals, I guess, where it's sort of like we're not necessarily concerned with what you want as Black people. We really don't need you driving the car or even in the front seat of the car. We really just kind of want you in the trunk. We need you, or we need the gasoline to fuel our car, and Black people are the gasoline that drives the Democratic Party engine that will get us into office. And then what they'll deliver, unfortunately, is what I refer to as trickle down liberalism. It's just a liberal spin of trickle down economics, where Reagan came up with the very false idea that if we put a bunch of money in the hands of the rich and the business owners, that's going to trickle down. That prosperity will trickle down to the masses. Anybody who thought that was going to work doesn't understand capitalism and how unregulated capitalism works. Unregulated capitalism basically is built on not trickling anything down to anybody if you don't have to, right? You have to be forced to trickle down. It's like when I give money to the oldest child in the house and I say, trickle that money down to your siblings. If we're not there to regulate that trickle, the trickle doesn't happen, right? So trickle down liberalism is to me where liberals, when you say, okay, what is your agenda for the Black community? What do you have for Black folks? We have these specific issues that require specific solutions. What can you do? They'll give us some broad-based plan. They'll say, we want to help, we have this anti-poverty initiative and Black people will benefit from that too. And I say, okay, I agree, but not every Black person is poor. Not every Black person affected by slavery is in poverty. The majority of Black people are not in poverty, right? Of course, those poverty initiatives are very important, but the majority of Black people are not in poverty based on the statistics. So you say, okay, well, what do you have specifically for Black? Well, we have this other healthcare initiative, healthcare for all, Black people benefit from that. Yeah, that's great, but tell us about your understanding and your concern for the specific experiences that Black people have had in this country. And you keep getting answers like this. And it frustrates me. Can you give us a perspective on this in terms of how you feel, and maybe something that'll help us feel a little bit better about what most of us feel is just a bunch of BS?
Well, it's difficult to feel better about it. And I recall being at a town hall meeting that we did on gentrification in Newark recently, and Pastor Mike McBride, who's with an organization called Faith in Action, particularly the Live Free Initiative. And he said one of our greatest difficulties, quite frankly, are our white liberal and progressive friends sometimes. And this has been a historical reality. And the historical reality is that very often when the class analysis trumps the race analysis in the minds of many white left liberal progressives. No matter what they say, it still comes off. So when you had Ralph Nader, that was his blind spot. Everything was about capitalism and so forth. And by the way, and what he was talking about from a class perspective was great and progressive. And I'll give Bernie Sanders his due in terms of his assessment and analysis of this kind of avaricious capitalism, how we ought to be dealing with it from a class perspective. And the fact that he's been able to drive a campaign as a socialist and raise so much money and get so many people on board, that's all good. But historically, what we found is when it comes down to talking about the specificity of issues related to Black people, then there's this kind of, well, we don't want to alienate white folks, either spoken or unspoken, because if we do, then, and if we stress it, then we're going to run white people away. So even if Bernie Sanders will come out with a criminal justice, position, which I'm sure he does, he's got some criminal justice stuff in his platform. The issue is when he does his standard stump speech. What's the standard stump speech? Does the standard stump speech include railing against the 1%, the whatever class he calls that, and all of which is true. And then does he, as he articulates it, then say, I'm also for an urban Marshall Plan. I'm also against gentrification in Black communities, and I want to work with Black leadership to talk about how we specifically design. You see what I'm saying? That's where you find that even if somebody prompts him and so forth, when it comes right down to it, then that is not a part of the standard stump speech. It becomes secondary, tertiary, if at all. And that's where Bernie Sanders needs to be educated. I mean, I have great respect for Bernie Sanders. I followed his career for many, many, many years as a, I'm a lefty, you know what I mean? But we come from a race class perspective, not a class perspective, and not a class race perspective. I am deliberately saying race class, because even within the context of class, Black people are at the bottom of the class. You see what I'm saying? And that's what we bring to the table. And that needs to be respected. And by the way, my conviction is that if we in fact articulate a program that openly embraces Black people, then Black people will march on ballot boxes with a fury that will be, in fact, will disproportionately have influence, and in fact will actually outvote those who are on the white supremacist side or the alienated white folks side. And let me explain what I mean. This is one of the things people don't look at. This is an overstatement, but the biggest political party in America today is not the Democrats, it's not the Republicans, it's non-voters. Let me say that again. Most, unlike any other Western democracy, if you're in Canada, if you're in Europe, you're in England, you're in France, like 80%, 90% of the eligible people who are eligible actually vote. That is not the case in the United States of America. These people jump up and get up and down and talk about a historic election if like 52% of the eligible electorate actually voted, or 53%, 55%. Oh my God, that's historical. But here's what's happening. That means that 45% of the people are outside, are not in it, don't care about it, are alienated and so forth. In a low participation environment, those who do vote have disproportionate impact. So if you, in this last election, I'm not indicting us, that's not what I'm saying. But in each one of those battleground states, where overall in composite, the orange man won by about 100,000 votes. I can guarantee you that there were more than 100,000 Black votes that stayed home, didn't register, did not vote, that if in fact they had been catered to, if in fact they had been mobilized, if in fact they had been organized, would have in fact won that election. But the problem is the Democratic Party is always timid on the question of talking. Even President Obama, the Black president, right? And I understand why he was nervous and so forth and so on, but he was nervous. He was a nervous president because, and he could talk about Native American issues. He could talk about the issues of Latino. He could talk about everybody else. But when it came down to our issues, it was more like lecturing us about our behavior and how we should be better and so forth and so on and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is what Stacey Abrams, I think, demonstrated in Georgia, Gilliam in Florida, is that not only on the question of race, but on the question of even more progressive policies, you go for the unorganized. That's what Reverend Jesse Jackson did in the Rainbow, and when he ran in 1984, 1988. People forget that. those campaigns were based on organizing the unorganized, going for those who were non-voters. And quiet as it's kept, that's what happened with the Trump campaign. A lot of these alienated white people, many of whom are racist, were on the sidelines. And if you look at the character of the Democratic Party now, those people came off of the sidelines as non-voters in those battleground states and injected themselves into the process. It was not just those Obama folks who flipped. It was also a number of new people who came into the process, because in a low participation environment, those who decide to organize and inject themselves into the process, let me say it again, exercise disproportionate power. So it doesn't matter. In some ways, you look at this current election, I'm not so much. I mean, I want white working class people to have their due. I mean, absolutely, because I'm a humanist. I believe in justice for all. But I'm not necessarily tripping over myself trying to figure out how to bring them back when I'm leaving on the table literally hundreds of thousands, if not a couple of million Black votes, who, if they were energized and respected, because we are the pillar of the Democratic Party, would march on ballot boxes, because there is a Marshall Plan on the table. There are reparations on the table. There are specific provisions in terms of issues that care and matter to us. And somebody has the audacity to say Black, to actually say Black, and say we are going to help Black people. And that's not contrary to anybody else's interest, because we also ought to be helping Latinos and Asians and white working class people. But don't mention all of them. And then somehow when it comes to us, you got to stutter and stammer, and somehow you get disoriented. So that's a long answer, but
no, that's a wonderful answer, because it sounds to me like what you're saying is that the race problem isn't just a Republican problem, right? That racism is it's a partly among many things. To me, I interpret it as a mental health issue that is very costly. It's very costly to
right.
be a racist person. If you're a businessman and you say, well, I don't want to do business with Black people, well, you're going to lose money. If you're a politician, you say, well, I don't want to say the word Black, well, you're going to lose support. The Democratic Party loses on multiple levels because they won't embrace the race problem. You must embrace the race if you want Black people to be engaged, because to me, the more enlightened and informed and intelligent the Black community becomes, the more they start to notice, like, wait a minute, why are you treating those people this way and treating us different? You're treating us worse than everybody else. And you're right. Every time people try to come and say, well, you Black men, you put Trump in office because you didn't vote, or you voted for you. I say, no. The Democratic Party put Trump in office.
Oh, absolutely.
They put Trump in office. Can you speak to that? Please continue. I'm sure you have more to say. You're a smart man.
No, yeah, but you're right, because again, not only because the other issue is voter suppression, by the way, massive calculated voter suppression. And in fact, what Black people ought to understand is almost as an axiom: if white folks don't want you to do something, you need to examine why they don't want you to do that. So here we had around voting, we got people doing with all these these voter ID bills and so forth and so on. And some of them would just openly say, because we're trying to blunt the Black vote. They're trying to blunt the black vote. Why? Because at the end of the day, we have to also recognize, for those people who really don't think voting matters, because at the end of the day, he or she and that collectivity of he and she's who control that policy do determine, as we say in political science, who gets what, where, why, and when. That's not marginal. It's like food stamps or house, or whether it's going to be housing allocations, or whether or not there's all kinds of things that are there that are critically important to people. But sometimes we don't see it that way. But those who control, and you see it with Trump, the orange man, more than ever, and just in terms of just policy after policy after policy being decimated. And those things do involve us. I mean, climate change, if we don't know about climate change is an equal opportunity destroyer. It is about to destroy the planet. And we have insane people running those policies. But back to your point, yeah, we're not, the blame and blunt cannot be brought to us, because we have been the most loyal element in the Democratic Party. And that's for a reason, because unfortunately, there was a time when you did have, in a state like New York, you could have Jackie Robinson Republicans. I mean, Jackie Robinson was a Republican, right? Why was he a Republican? Because you had a liberal, let me say that again, a liberal wing of the Republican Party, which was represented by Jacob Javits. People go back and look up who Jacob Javits was. Kenneth Keating, senator from this state. Nelson Rockefeller, who ended up doing some terrible things to mar his record, but he was a liberal, which means on issues like civil rights, social programs, so forth and so on, he was very much for those things. On the business side, maybe more conservative. John Lindsay, the former mayor of New York, was a flaming Republican liberal, which means what? You could, in those days, if the Democrat was a conservative right-wing person, you could vote for the Republican and you could find a moderate liberal Republican. Today, you cannot find them. That's like they are extinct. To be a Republican today means, by definition, you are conservative, extreme conservative, or even more radically extreme conservative. I mean, that's so now even people who are conservative like Susan, they're described as liberals and moderates, when really they are and back in the day, we would say these are right-wing Republicans. So that puts us in a box, in a bind. So we are right pragmatically to say, in a choice between a Hillary Clinton and the Orange Man, we should have chosen Hillary Clinton, but all of her flaws and so forth and so on, because that was a better rational choice. But that was not the best choice. And what we want to do is have the best. And by the way, what that really means is we as Black people have to create our own independent structures. I mean, that's one of the things that I had hoped would happen with the National Rainbow Coalition. Most of my life, I've also articulated the notion of having a third force in American politics. So what we mean by a third force is we have an independent structure that encourages people to get engaged in community organizing, protest, meeting and greeting the people and working where the people are. That's the other thing about American politics. Voting is not democracy. Elections do not equal democracy. Participation equals democracy. And what we have is a system which discourages you really from even voting, because there's no election holidays, all these barriers. If you don't vote, they take it away from you. All this kind of madness goes down. And so they really discourage you. And then once you vote, go home. No. We need a participatory process. Participation equals democracy, not elections. So we need a process that touches people where they are and builds with them and helps them, engage them in the process. So you're not just a politician coming around every time there's an election. You are there working with people in their communities on a day-to-day basis. And then we articulate an agenda. That's why the other things that elder activists like myself like to be able to do cross-generationally, because I came out of the Gary Convention in 1972. There was the Gary Convention adopted a national Black political agenda. The idea was that Black people all across the country should have Black political assemblies or independent mechanisms by which they measured candidates, Black candidates, white candidates, on the basis of what is the agenda, not your color necessarily, though obviously we're gonna give ourselves a little break, you see what I'm saying, on that issue. But what is the basis of the agenda? No permanent friends, no permanent enemies, a permanent agenda. So in that instance, if there were a socialist candidate, a communist candidate, an independent candidate, Republican candidate, or Democratic candidate, we can decide we will support those candidates based on their agenda. That's the inside-outside strategy. And then in those instances where we don't have candidates that we think are what we think they ought to be, then state by state, we can run our own candidates. Now, there's a group out there called the Working Families Party. A brother named Maurice Mitchell is heading that up. It's really kind of what the rainbow should have become, because it is kind of a third force. And it has the ability, in New York, you can vote for the Working Families Party. In some other states, you can do likewise. They're trying to get ballot access. We need that kind of flexibility, because when we have that kind of flexibility, we will begin to discipline and punish those who are not moving our agenda in the way that they should.
All right, everybody who's in here, I'm speaking with Dr. Ron Daniels. Excuse me, guys, I'm choking a little bit. Dr. Ron Daniels is the founder and president of the Institute for the Black World 21st Century. His website is ibw21.org. That's ibw21.org. Also, everybody who's watching, please make sure you subscribe. Hit the thumbs up button. If you haven't hit the thumbs up button, please take a second, hit the thumbs up button. Also, a reminder, I'll be in Chicago this week, this Sunday. So if you want to come out, go to drboychicago.com. Also, we'll be in Los Angeles in August. You can go to drboylosangeles.com to learn more. Dr. Daniels, I want to ask you about this. One of the things that's been brought up on the channel, Dr. Claude Anderson brought it up as well, and I'd love to get your take on it too. There's this issue that a lot of African Americans don't know about, and Bernie Sanders, people like that don't bring it up, but I think that they should. It has to do with Black land loss over the last 90 years. I think a lot of people are stunned, absolutely stunned, to find out that we own far less land today than we owned even before integration. And integration was considered to be this great social marvel, where we supposedly got all these benefits, but I think a lot of people are having a hard time seeing the benefits of that. If we owned more land 100 years ago than we own today, and not just a little bit more, like 10 to 15 times more. Can you speak on that land loss issue and what that means in the reparations conversation?
Yeah, well, that's one of the great tragedies, really. During the course of my lifetime, I had the privilege of working with groups like the Emergency Land Fund in the South, Southern Cooperative Development Fund under the late great visionary Father A.J. McKnight. Also, the Federation of Southern Farm Cooperatives that still exist. And even now, some of the younger organizers are coming up with similar kinds of formulations. And I can remember vividly the Emergency Land Fund driving it home, talking about how much land we once had, because after the Civil War and Reconstruction, Black folks, we are an ingenious people. We found various ways to accumulate land. Now, the tragedy is, and this is why reparations is also due, it's not just what happened with enslavement, it's what happened after enslavement. When in fact, and Claude Anderson points this out, we couldn't benefit from the Homestead Act and various other things that white folks could benefit from and therefore accumulate property. But nonetheless, we accumulated substantial tracts of property, even as many of our people were condemned actually to being and going back to the same plantations as sharecroppers and agricultural, as tenant farmers and agricultural workers. But we were tricked. And so what happened was there were always ways in which, and in some instances, people got so fed up, maybe because of the boll weevil infestations and then the terror in the South. Sometimes people would just walk away from the land. But and then therefore when it got advertised and so forth, people would sneak in and take it over. But also there were always insidious kinds of schemes to trick Black people from losing their land. And then what we found out was the agricultural extension agent, was not giving us the same kind of advice, same kind of technical assistance that he was giving to white farmers. So while we're struggling and making something out of nothing, which is making lemonade out of lemons, as we've always have, making something out of nothing, as our mothers and fathers used to tell us, then, we were being discriminated. We were being excluded from those kinds of programs. And in fact, as you are aware, there have been a couple of lawsuits against the Department of Agriculture around that, which there have been some reparations granted, not enough, but some. But this is a huge issue because we've had tremendous amount of land loss because of these discriminatory and exclusionary policies and those things that we were never included in the first place, like FHA after the war. We didn't get those benefits. We were consciously and systematically redlined and excluded from those programs. And then, as you well know, come 2207 or whatever it was, the crash on Wall Street wiped out, even as we struggled and got up, and that house that has that equity in it wiped Black people out again, set us back, enormously in terms of our that asset that is so precious in this capitalist society in terms of having resources to build on. So, here we are with Black mayors, athletes, artists, entertainers all over the place. But when you look at the composite picture for Black people, we are no better off, both in terms of the accumulation of land, which we lost, and property, but also in terms of wealth. And wealth is really, your combined assets. It ain't what your income is. It ain't. And even there's a gap even today between Blacks and whites that we've never ever, even as you may be making more, we're still lagging behind where white folks are on that equation. But when we come down to the wealth gap, which really matters, your composite net assets, we have not progressed in a century. And so that's why reparations is also important. That is one of the ways that we can begin to catch up, to heal and catch up. And so we are owed. I mean, so we shouldn't even be apologizing about it. We shouldn't even be hesitating about that. This nation was built, much of its commercial and industrial wealth was built on the free labor of Black people. And it's not just a labor question. It is the pain, the agony, the suffering, the destruction of families, all those things that go with it that we have to be compensated for. And in actuality, this nation will never, ever be a more perfect union until this original sin, one of the original sins, is dealt with. The other original sin that we must never forget as conscious, righteous, just people is that we are all here because of the dispossession of the Native Americans, the genocidal takeover of this land by the Pilgrims and the pioneers and so forth and so on. And even though they have gotten some, I mean, after years of struggle and suffering and so forth and so on, they got a little bit. The Native Americans have never ever been made whole as well. So we must always be conscious of that. So when they're raising their issues about the need to get more assistance and help and so forth and so on, we should be with that because we are here because of them. We're on their land. We came here 400 years ago, you know, and this is the 400th anniversary of the first enslaved indentured servants coming to this country, right? And after that, when you look at it, the free labor, that free labor helped to fuel, and you're an economist, you know about the acceleration principle, the multiplier effect and the acceleration principle. And it doesn't really matter in that regard whether you were a white capitalist or not. Talk about trickle down. You benefited from that. So even if you were in New England, you know what I mean, and you were working in the textile industry, there would not have been a textile industry had not been for the triangular trade, which was in fact, taking, a rum over to Africa, trinkets and other kind of stuff, enslaving Africans, coming to the Caribbean, shifting and dumping on and then trading those slaves, and then getting that molasses that would come up to the New England, and then that became the basis for the whiskey distillery industry from which the Kennedys got their fortunes. And because there was so much of that traffic going on, you had to do what? It had a multiplier effect. You had to build more ships, and if you're building ships, that's nails, that's timber, that's textiles, and that's how it works. So if you got a job, you didn't have to be on a slave trafficker. You got a job because of the slave trade. And that's one of the things I thought was beautiful about the hearing that we had that was convened with Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee being our major proponent on HR 40. There's a young woman who's it's just called Traces of the Trade. I'm blanking on her name now, but she was so eloquent because her family was one of the major, was deeply involved in it. And she said very quietly to white people, you benefited. You may not think so. You can say that your ancestors came here and such and such and such and such and got a job. She said, you must understand you got a job because the free labor of Black people created that job. And that's the point that we have to get through in terms of the education of even white folks. But we as Black people have to understand that too. So we're not sort of saying, well, I don't know, and hesitating and stammering. We don't need to do that because in fact, our free labor helped build this country. And that 40 acres and a mule, had we gotten that 40 acres and a mule, by the way, that was the correct thing to do. I mean, General Sherman, had actually allocated from South Carolina to Florida. He had actually set aside 40 acres and a mule for those soldiers and formerly enslaved Africans and so forth. That endowment was the correct move. Actually came before the Congress of the United States and was eventually vetoed by Andrew Johnson, which says that they understood what it meant to give people an endowment in this country. But that endowment was wiped out, and we still have been trying to get that 40 acres and a mule ever since. So it's not, again, the individual check so much, but in composite, the billions and trillions of dollars. And you can never put a dollar amount on the suffering of Black people, by the way. You could never, ever do that anyway. But there's a
let me jump in and mention this too. I'll say this, and I agree. Everything you said makes perfect sense, And one of the things I can tell you is that in the space, where we're operating, when I'm talking to people online every day and stuff like that, I think that there is a sense of exhaustion with, the idea of of educating white people. I tend to believe that even though whites are not educated on the history of racism, I don't know. Um, uh, I don't believe that they don't know what they're doing as a collective. I would not be convinced that they are not aware. Like Bernie Sanders being educated. He's 80 something years old. He's an old dog. What new tricks is he really gonna learn? Not that he's not that he's too old to be president, but he's not 25. He's not a 19-year-old, right? I think he knows what he's saying. He knows what he's doing, and I think that the interesting thing is, when we talk about, educating whites, which I think can add value, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying they can't work. Or when you talk about the hearings, hearings add value on some level. I think that people are not clear on exactly what comes from a hearing. Like, for example, they had the hearing over Facebook and Zuckerberg, and nothing really happened. It was just a hearing. Like, okay, we're gonna let you get it all out, and then we're gonna move on and do business as usual. And then also even the study. HR 40, I think there's some of the skepticism I've seen of HR 40 is the only thing that needs to be studied is not the stuff that they're studying, like, oh, did slavery, how does slavery impact society, whatever. No, what should be studied is how much did y'all steal and how y'all gonna pay that back. When can we expect payment, because we know that y'all owe us, because we can go down the list and all the things. So to me, the thing we want to study is, how do we study how much land was taken and who specifically took that damn land? Because we could trace all these deeds back 200-300 years, whatever we got to do, and find out, okay, this property was transferred in 1902. It shouldn't have been transferred. We're going to go back and we're going to grab that. Right? Like literally, I mean, and I know that that's radical, right? We know
but that's good radical. I mean, by the way, that is exactly why this broad, let me first address the educating white folks point. I agree. Well, I'm going to start from the plane that some people, not all, would do better if they knew better. And just as we could talk about the miseducation of the Negro, let's look at the American education system. I'm a now distinguished lecturer emeritus at York College City University of New York. And in my class on racial and ethnic politics, I began with the provocative assumption, telling my students, I'm here to tell you that America was conceived as a white man's land. And then they get nervous. And I said, I'm going to give you the document, like Malcolm said, I'm going to give you the documented evidence that it was such. But you see, most white people have never seen that evidence. They've all gotten this glorified, George Washington and the chopping of the cherry, all this madness, all this. We all went through this kind of sanitized history that went down that left us out. But for white people, they've never had real history either. They're not reading Howard Zinn's The People's History of that is not the required text. Because if they read Howard Zinn's The People's History of America, of the United States, was the required text, some of them, not all of them, would have a different perspective. So now I think it's worthwhile to educate folks. And let me tell you what's happening. There is the greatest surge in interest in reparations that I have seen in my lifetime right now at this moment. Not just by Black people, because I mean, in a weird kind of way, white folks is interested in it. Unfortunately, Black folks become interested in it too. And I'm telling you now, I'm going into cafeterias and restaurants, and I'm hearing average, ordinary Black people talking about HR 40. Black people at a level I've never heard before. The American Civil Liberties Union is a liberal organization, but they're a white organization. The American Civil Liberties Union just recently came out, and they have fully endorsed the concept of reparations, and they are supporting HR 40. And they're committed to educating their millions of constituencies around that. The Fellowship of Reconciliation, which is a predominantly white organization, is getting ready to have a grassroots conference on reparations out in Ferguson coming up in just next week. There are churches coming out, faith leaders. And some of that is because of the scholarship that's been coming down. White scholars, Black scholars, people have been reading that. And you got people like David Brooks, the conservative, but conservative in the more traditional lane, not these rabid, whatever. He's saying the same thing. He said, look, the more and more I study this, the more and more I talk to Black people, the more and more I become convinced that reparations is worth considering. So I'm saying there are now more white people than ever before, who are embracing this idea. We have with the the National African American Reparations National African American Reparations Commission, NAARC. There is a young white progressive, anti-racist progressive, who is now preparing to launch a program, a fundraising program, to encourage white people to pay reparations now. And by that, they mean they're looking at the 10-point program of the National African American Reparations Commission, and they want to raise money to implement a project associated with that. And the reception has been good. So I don't think that the vast majority of white people will come on board, but we don't need the vast majority of white people. Just in the political arena, it's the same thing. If we're really looking at, quite frankly, the political process in this country, if Black folks are the base and Latinos are on board and Asians are on board, we only need a small, that's the reverse rainbow. We only need a small percentage of white people to be on board, because a lot of white people are not going to vote, are not going to be in the process. So in that sense, we could also, sort of dominate. So I just wanted to lay that out there, because this is, every day, if you just, and by the way, let me just say to people, when you go to the IBW website, please go to the Reparations Resource Center. We have the most extensive online reparations resource center of anywhere in the world. And by the way, one of the things that's also driving this is the 15 nations in the Caribbean, all 15 of them, moderate, conservative, radical. They had the audacity about 3 years ago to come up and finally said, y'all created this mess, meaning the former colonial powers. They are now demanding reparations from the European powers for native genocide and African enslavement. They're in negotiations, they're in conversations. And so that's happening. But the other thing I want to point out is this, Boyce, Professor Watkins, is that also there's room for a whole lot of action, because there are colleges and universities that benefited from slavery. We can track that. And so students ought to be organizing around that. Every community, like I was in Memphis recently, and they talking about the power structure in Memphis is the power structure that derives its wealth from this thing, that people in Memphis should be organizing around that, putting pressure on them to say, no, you must pay, you must deal with, you not only must apologize, but you must also, out of your wealth and your resources, you must pay. Beto O'Rourke in Florida just came forward and said, my family was involved. And so he's trying to figure out what he can do about it. Mitchell McConnell's family was involved too, but he ain't talking about doing nothing. That's the difference between a Beto O'Rourke who's saying, I see something, I got to figure out how to do some repair. So this is a very, very interesting moment. The other thing that's happening is, in an odd kind of way, the virulent, and it's a good thing because it's out in the open, but it's also dangerous because of what's happening with it. That racism that had been driven underground. Because Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, he's an elder statesman now. He's one of the most incredible, one of the most brilliant leaders of our time, an authentic genius. He takes complicated ideas and make them, simple. He said, it ain't just about the people in the white sheets, meaning the Ku Klux Klan. He says it's about those who are in the blue suits, meaning those who were in corporations, and those in the black and also in the halls of Congress, and also those in the black robes. In other words, what he's saying is there's some people who have the same views as the Ku Klux Klan, but they keep them underneath. It is manifested in policy considerations that are not talked about in terms of race, but they have a disparate impact and a discriminatory effect, and they get away with it. But what's happening now is the orange man just broke that stuff wide open. The pus is out there. It's out there for everybody to see. Now it's dangerous because they're attacking people, but at least we now see what the deal is. And there's some people who are looking at it, who are white people, and saying, nah, this is ugly. This is not, we cannot tolerate this as a nation. We have to therefore find ways of addressing white supremacy and being aware that they are a part of the problem and who are willing to address it. So I will, even as a strategy, I will address that segment of the white community, but I'm not going to spend the majority of my time educating white folks. Now, I'll tell you that. That's not going to be the majority of my time, but I do see a need. I see a value.
Well, what I like about your perspective, Dr. Daniels, is that you help broaden my point of view. I don't trust white people that much. I just don't. Even liberal white folks, the people I fought with at Syracuse University were mostly liberal white people. It wasn't. The conservatives actually understood me better.
Right.
know that I'm a self-motivated person. I'm not, I was raised in a household that had conservative values, even though we didn't identify as Republican or Democrat. We just believed, that ain't nobody gonna give you nothing in this world. You're gonna have to go fight for it, and that was it. So I identified, and I don't think the liberals have, or excuse me, the conservatives have a monopoly on personal responsibility. I think anybody with common sense gets that. I think Black people got that before integration. We got that. That's why we had wealth, we had land, we had schools, we had businesses, because people said, get out there, boy, and work hard for it, and that's how you're gonna get it, right? And now I think that the challenge is that, and again, that's why I like to listen to yourself, because I try to avoid becoming so cynical about the system that I can't hear anything that's being said over there. Like what you're saying, I'm sitting there, I'm listening, and I'm kind of shifting in my chair a little bit, like man, I don't, educating these white folks, like really, but to your point though, let's be honest, and everybody in the chat, tell me if you see this. Every now and then there are people who are not Black who surprise me. Maybe there have been times where I've been surprised, where I've seen somebody or a group of people that has shown true decency in this whole conversation about race. In fact, I've actually run across a few white folks who are more committed to the racial inequality issue than a lot of Black people I know. We got some dangerous Black people out here. Some, like some of these rappers, they want to just really obliterate the whole community, destroy our youth. So I agree with you. I don't think decency runs across racial lines. And it seems to me that what is most critical, and I'll let you get the last word today, because I've enjoyed everything you said. It seems to me that what is really what we definitely can all agree on, and I want everybody in the chat to consider this possibility, is that it's just a multi-pronged strategy that's going to be required here. The same way you and I worked together, we were exchanging ideas, and you were teaching me about the way your organization approaches things, and I was giving you some pointers and saying, okay, I think that if you guys add this in, this can help. It seems like that's what you need, right? You need that. You need the do-for-selfers. You need the builders. You need the business owners. You need the families that endow themselves through land ownership, life insurance policy, etc. But you also need those people that will go in there and engage in the politics. We can't all engage. We can't all just decide to not participate or to just write off everything. Because I'm gonna tell you, the people on my channel, they don't have a lot of patience for the Congressional Black Caucus. A lot of them see them, and maybe the CBC do a better job of really communicating exactly what's getting done, because I know a lot of Black folks, y'all can tell me if y'all think this, I know a lot of Black folks who see them as a pack of coons. They really do. And just being real with you. So maybe that's a communication issue, as opposed to just, us writing each other off, because it seems like we need each other. And I'd love to get your take on that.
Yeah, it is. It is in part a communications issue. But let me just quickly say a couple of things. And first of all, I want to come back to you. And I'm going to come back to you because a couple of times you've talked about the work that you're getting ready to do in Chicago and some other places, so on and so on. And my dear beloved friend right down the road, Cornell University, one of my great mentors, but also one of my friends, Dr. James Turner. And in a conversation we had, because he was always been an advisor to me, he said, Ron, one of the most important things is not only to be of the race, it's to be for the race. He said, we got a whole lot of people who are of the race. I mean, they're Black, they're cosmetically Black, and so on. He said, but they're not for the race. And so therefore, a Boyce Watkins, you could have made a decision, the hell with all this stuff. I'm out of academia, and you could go become hedge fund, whatever you wanted to do, by yourself, for yourself. And you have every right to do that. But see, what you're doing is you're taking the skills that you have, and you are committed to be of the race and for the race. You are multiplying it. You came to the Power Networking Conference with George Frazier. We have a similar body of people. So and so what we need to do is continually be cultivating and bringing more and more people together who are of the race and for the race at all levels. So that doesn't mean everybody has to go out there and be on the front lines carrying a picket sign or whatever. But if you're in corporate America, you sit up in there. But figure out while you're up in there how you can be of the race. How do you tilt those politics? It doesn't mean you're necessarily in a confrontation with the white folks every day either. But it means you're figuring out how to, and if you're in a corporate foundation, all those kind of things work. The other thing I want to say, and this is the essence of what IBW is about and the legacy work I'm about, it is a very simple proposition. We are each other's best teacher. When you look at that, when you look at what we believe in the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, we have this notion of what I call cultivating a culture of collaboration to heal Black families, communities, and nations. Let me say that again. Cultivating a culture of collaboration to heal Black families, Black communities, and Black nations. What do I mean by that? It means everybody doesn't have to do the same thing. Specialization and division of labor. But what it also means is, if you look at some of the work that we do, we have racial justice collaboratives around criminal justice policies and people in places like Washington, D.C. and Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. In those cities, we have people doing criminal justice work in the same city who weren't even sitting at the table with each other. That's not a radical proposition to say that, look, brothers and sisters, periodically be at the same table together to figure out what your common strategy is going to be. We most recently convened in Newark, and you can go to the website and you can see the town hall meeting from it. You can see the synopsis of the proceeding. We convened, gentrification is destroying, eating up Black communities all across this country. Institute of the Black World 21st Century convened a national emergency summit on gentrification that brought together community-based activists. We brought together community economic development planners, urban planners. We brought together elected officials, human rights, civil rights organizations like the NAACP and the Urban League, and faith leaders at the same table. And we're now creating a national resource center to figure out how do we work with each other to fight this monster, including these opportunity zones that are out there that you know that are just about the white communities out. And that also applies to the National African American Reparations Commission, where we could have all been separately doing this. And we have a limited function, that is to promote the idea that there's a platform that you can go to the website and see, and HR 40. But when you look at the National African American Reparations Commission, and when you go to the resource center, you'll see the names of a Dr. Julianne Malvo. You'll see Dr. Nana Patricia Newton, and you know these are people that you know who are working together, and that's what we need to do. We are each other's best teachers. It's not a radical proposition. When we work together and collaborate on the basis of principle, because there's some people we can't work with because we have to assume a certain ideological base point. But inside of that, like you said before, you and I will struggle with each other a little here, we'll check a little this and so forth. But I know that you are going in the same direction. I know you're not Clarence Thomas. You know, I know that's not where you are. And so we may have a little tweak here and there, but we are each other's best teacher. And I just want to commend you again for taking your skill and your talent and going out there to teach people and educate people in this area of financial literacy, wealth building, how to get this stuff done, because that is how it has to be. People like you who have that skill, have that talent, who are of the race and for the race.
Well, you know, I will say the same thing. And as you're talking, I'm even thinking about how you and I reconnected. We've known each other for probably over a decade. And we also both, we have a lot of friends in common, but one guy you mentioned that we both love and respect so much was the great Dr. Ron Walters.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
He was just a wonderful man. I mean, I only had maybe 2 conversations with him on the phone, but those conversations stuck with me, you know, and what I like about what you just said, and I want everybody to consider this, you guys know we don't tell you what to think, we just share ideas with you. Is that there is so much value when we come together and try to find the things that unite us as opposed to the things that divide us. You know, it's rare that you're going to have somebody where you're in lockstep on every single issue. It's just not going to happen. But as you mentioned, you find that common ground. And I appreciate what George Fraser does with FraserNet because you had the Black business owners that are doing their thing, and maybe some of them were hardcore capitalists, maybe some of them were even Republicans. It wasn't a judgment thing. We were all there because we all love our community and want to see Black people win, because you have people that were across the ideological spectrum that were represented. There was a strong you brought an education to me about my African roots, and just my deeper, forming an even deeper connection to my history. So I love the ceremony that you led, and when you did the Ashes, that was inspirational, right? So I love the fact, I love that gathering because it just seemed to represent a broader entirety and diversity of Blackness that you don't always see, because you see so many people that are so quick to fight. You know, like, oh, I don't like you because you disagree with me on this one issue. Like, or even with the ADOS movement, how you kind of had, you know, just everybody being attacked. Like, you're not fighting hard enough on reparations. Yeah, but does that mean that I need to hate you, or you know, because you're not fighting the same way I'm fighting, or because you're not going at the same speed, or whatever it is? We have to kind of get past that, right? And grab the good and push the bad to the side. So I think that's what you were saying. Is that accurate?
Yeah, no, that's the essence of what, and that's my life's work. I mean, this is the legacy project. But what IBW, Institute of the Black World 21st Century, and let me just say, IBW is not a new idea. This is the 21st century. The original IBW, there was an original IBW out of Atlanta, which was created by, you know, a number of leading activists and scholars, led by an article written by LeBron Bennett Jr. about the challenge of Blackness. And so a number of people came together. Haki Madhubuti was among them. I'm blanking on some of the names, unfortunately, right now. There is a river. I'm trying to think of the brother who wrote that piece, that's one of the most beautiful pieces of history you'll ever see. He was the heartbeat of it. And I apologize for the senior moment. But the point is, we decided, they put it to bed after the rebellion in 1968 and some other things not getting funded. They put it to bed. We thought that the idea of the IBW was a good idea. We wanted to resurrect it and then create one that had a more action-oriented basis of it. But the essence of it is this idea of collaboration, you know, of pulling together like-minded people who may have some differences, but at least learning from each other, you know, and so you'll know that, because the other thing is, and I sometimes get criticized because I'm a nationalist and a Pan-Africanist and all that good stuff, but I don't want to have an incestuous conversation with myself. You see what I'm saying? If I'm only talking to nationalists and Pan-Africanists, I don't see that as a success. I have to convert more people. So I don't really carry that on my sleeve either. I don't just go around, because one of the things we have, and I say this phrase, is that sometimes we have people OD on ideology. We talk about ideology so much and keep pumping it out there. Some people get like terrified. So I like to live it. I like to have the values exude what it is that we're trying to do. And Ron Walters, by the way, was a beautiful brother in that regard. No question. He was a Pan-Africanist. He was progressive. He was a nationalist. He was an academician. And he is sorely missed because he was one of the chief advisors to the Congressional Black Caucus. The Congressional Black Caucus does a lot of good, actually. They don't publicize it enough. But one of the things that Ron Walters did was he was always there. They trusted him. He could call them into a room and call them to account and say, y'all need to be doing A, B, C. And we miss that because the caucus is drifting a little bit now in a way that was not there when Ron Walters was there. But the bottom line still is that, you know, when we build different things, and like we have a State of the Black World Conference. State of the Black World Conference is coming from people who have my orientation, but we have across the spectrum, we bring people into that space. And one of the things that when we do that, it's just like you're talking about, the space that you've created. It's a Black space. It's a loving space. It's a caring space. We need those spaces to ourselves, absent and separate and apart from, the hostility and white supremacy and the stress of all that, just to be with each other, embrace each other, sisters and brothers. And I say brothers too, because sometimes, brothers can be a little difficult. I mean, we need to embrace each other. You know what I mean? We need to embrace each other and have those conversations and figure out. And here's the other thing I say is critical. When we do these sessions, and we do State of the Black World Conference, we do them every 4 years, coming up again at the end of 2020, actually, is models. So I don't want, and people have to sort of learn this a little bit too. I mean, your idea may not be the greatest idea of all time. I mean, kind of find out what else is out there first, and can you enhance that? Can you build on that? And find the gap and build in that gap. Because what I like to see is when we come to the conferences is we all know, and we spend time with the analysis. But it also is who is doing what. And I'd like to see in the economic area who are doing these innovative, creative kinds of things that you could actually latch on to, that you could also emulate, you can join, you can be a part of. But it also gives you hope that it's possible. Because, we take a lot of beatings out here in terms of, what ain't happening, the decimation of our community and so forth. There are some people doing some great work. And a lot of it is also coming from some very innovative young people. So we also need them in the mix. Working with us and sharing their ideas and new ways of doing things and whatever. But always the key word, I say again, is being of the race and for the race. As long as we're of the race and for the race, and I mean righteously. When I say righteously, that is not meaning antagonistic to anybody. Because when we go back to the ancient creed of Ma'at, to the ancient Kemetic creed, it is about righteousness and justice and balance. And when you see Black people at our best, we are always talking about righteousness and justice and morality and ethics. And that becomes important because, quite frankly, one of the biggest contradictions we have today in this country and throughout the world is we have Black people who are unethical, Black people who are corrupt, Black people. If you look at the African continent, it is, Du Bois said, the richest continent on the face of the earth. And yet a white man is the imperialism and all that neocolonialism has been a problem. But you also got some Negroes over there stealing a hell of a lot of wealth, you know, who are depositing hundreds of millions of dollars in Swift bank accounts. And it's like Dr. Betty Shabazz once said to me, she said, Ron, that's Malcolm X's beautiful wife and partner. She said, we may be oppressed, but we do not have to cooperate with our oppressors. We got a whole lot of Negroes who are cooperating with their oppressors, taking wealth that Black people should be having in places like Nigeria and all over. I mean, I don't want to sing out anywhere, all across the continent. There's enough wealth in Africa that no Black person on the African continent should be in abject poverty. And all of us should be uplifted as Africa as a global base of Black power, which means you got to have people who are of the race and for the race and who are determined to use the resources that we have as a way to help uplift the race. And when we do that, then the whole world bows at our feet, not because we have military power, but because of the ethics, the morality, because of the absolute beauty of the construct of our communities that we're putting forth. That's what I strive for, you know, and that's what I live for, because I think that's what our ancestors wanted us to do.
Well, you know, I agree with you 100%. And what I'm going to do is, at your convenience, you know, I'd love to have you back to talk about specifically about Africa. I know that there is a lot of interest amongst, you know, the viewers on how to reconnect to the continent, how, you know, maybe how to do business there. Just thoughts about, you know, ways to kind of find who we are, you know, in Africa. I think that that's a whole long discussion we could have about that. And I know that you are one of the world's premier experts on that topic as well, and you've educated the heck out of me. So just so you guys know, I will have Dr. Daniels back. And until we all meet again, I hope you guys will take a second and give Dr. Daniels a digital round of applause. Just a quick thank you for him joining the chat. Also, let me give you guys his institute. It's the Institute for the Black World 21st Century. He's the founder and president. It's an excellent think tank for Black people. It is a place that we should support. I hope that you'll go there. The website is ibw21.org. That's ibw21.org. Somebody please type that in so others can see it. ibw21.org. They have lots of resources there for you. They have a conference. They have all different kinds of things. I mean, you have your own universities and institutes and think tanks and things like that out here. We've got to support your own stuff. You know, when the Notre Dame Cathedral burned down, white folks raised $1 billion in 48 hours. Well, right. Black people should be able to at least raise $1 million in 48 hours for the institutes that we care about. So you must support your own. Also, just as a quick reminder to everybody, in case you're wondering, I'll be in Chicago Sunday doing the investment seminar. You can go to drboycechicago.com to find out more. Next month in Los Angeles, we'll be doing some things out there. drboycelosangeles.com. And last but not least, if you have an interest in learning more about buying rental properties, things like that, we're doing a whole summit next weekend out of the Black Business School that you can join for free. It's called the Emancipation Equation. So if you're interested in signing up, go to theemancipationequation.com, THE, that's theemancipationequation.com. Hit the thumbs up button, hit the share button, hit the subscribe button. Thank you again, Dr. Daniels. I appreciate your time, brother. Absolutely, sir. And I look forward to seeing you again. And everybody have a good day. I'm going to go take me a nap. See y'all soon. All right. Bye-bye, brother.